What did you read? Because I'm looking at this list and I don't remember that you told me which one
Okay,
that you
so
read.
I feel that I need to justify which one I read a little bit because I made a mistake. I mean, I didn't entirely make a
Uh-huh.
mistake, but I made a little bit of a mistake. So I was looking at these six books, right? And there are two historical fiction books, which I don't really want to read. I prefer, you know, not historical fiction, I guess. Um, well, historical fiction tends to like try and make a either like do some creative alternative history, at which point I would be like, okay, just do a straight fantasy universe, or they try and like give you some perspective on a historical event, and I don't really care. At least not for pleasure reading, right? So that was those two are out, and
All
then there was
right.
literary fiction, which sounded actually kind of difficult. And then when I looked at the little like, um,
She thought she was helping children
yeah,
in
like
need, but what if her efforts leave them worse
it's not
off?
quite where I want to go. And then psychological suspense is just annoying, in my opinion, right? Like, ooh, what's gonna happen next? I don't know.
See, that book would have been my second choice, and now I'm kind of curious. I like
Well,
was
you should have told me
I
that because
jumped
it
to
would have
thriller
saved
too
me,
quickly.
right? Because then I saw urban
Oh,
fantasy,
well,
and it's clearly targeted at women. But I,
that covers pretty
yeah, it's
that
purple. I mean, that's
I
really,
the
yeah.
woman in me is the part that wants
But
to read that.
I was like, whatever. It says urban fantasy, which usually means some kind of like gritty, um, and kind of like noir-esque genre choices, right?
Please tell me this was a young adult novel where she falls in love with a vampire,
I've got some I've got some
because
great news for
I'll be
you.
so happy. I'm gonna be
This is
so
a young
happy.
adult novel where she falls in love with a
All
vampire.
right, episode 1 of Kindle First Responders. Everybody falling in love with a vampire.
In fact, can I go ahead and start the
First, do title and author and thumbs
yeah
up or thumbs down,
yeah
and then I'll do
okay.
mine.
Okay, so I read Venom and Vanilla by Shannon Mayer, and I'm going to caveat this, right? I'm going to say that if you like paranormal romance and you're just looking for kind of a weekend read in the genre, thumbs up. I'm going to say if you're looking for a good fantasy novel, this is so much thumbs down it's not even funny. Don't even be in the same room as the book. It's just not.
It got a caveated thumbs up, so that's worth something. I read Before You Leap by Keith Houghton, which it says it's a thriller. It doesn't really deliver as a thriller. It doesn't. I give it a thumbs down, not because it was offensive, but because it didn't really try anything. And the things that it did try, I'd either seen before or wasn't impressed
But
by.
you just described my book too.
How many romance vampire novels have you seen
Uh,
before?
can I claim the fifth here?
All right, duly noted. You've read an unknown number of young adult
More than
vampire
one
romance
is all
novels.
I'm gonna say.
Okay.
More than one, and not including Venom and Vanilla. Man, the name should have given it away too. I really should have thought about it. I should have thought this
Yeah,
through more.
yeah, I
I just
didn't.
went by
For
genre.
whatever reason, all the time I spent looking at that cover, I didn't even notice that the title of the book was
Yeah.
Venom and Vanilla. I actually made my guess about vampires before noticing that the word Venom was even in the
Well, I
title.
mean, post Twilight, the young adult section just turned into vampires and werewolves. Sorry, everyone on Team Jacob. I'm just
Someone wanted to read this book and not be, and be surprised by all of it.
okay. Yeah. So I'm gonna limit myself to the same kind of level of spoilers that we see in the Amazon's little summary. And I know that some people think even actually no, even the summary is extremely spoilery. So maybe even less than that. This is a little much. I didn't read it. I'm in the camp of like if you read a summary, you've pretty much ruined half the book. So
Yeah, I try not to read those either. So I guess I won't for
Venom and Vanilla.
yeah.
You're gonna read it? Is that what you're
No, I'm
saying?
not going to read it. Okay, I guess you can. Maybe I should read the one for Before You Leap as well, because so
Yeah.
I know where to put it.
So maybe we need to split this into like three sections. The like people who won't want to even read the summary, people who will read the summary, and people who just don't care about it at all. And I can spoil everything.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, least spoilery. Here we go. Sorry, I'm rereading the summary here to make sure that I'm not
Yeah,
crazy.
I'm reading the Before You Leap summary.
Yeah. Okay. So least
We're
least
so
spoiler.
prepared.
Well, this is closer to the two dudes talking genre than anything else, right?
Yeah.
We don't even have a list of topics to cover, right? Like
There are two topics.
I guess that's true.
You could have taken notes on the book. I didn't tell you not to. I didn't take any notes.
Neither did I.
So,
It's not worth it. This book is about, well, if I were going to summarize it in one sentence, I would say this is Breaking Dawn meets Percy Jackson.
all right. So I have positive memories of both of those things.
Have you read Breaking Dawn?
Is Breaking Dawn not what I'm thinking about?
Breaking Dawn is the last book in the Twilight Saga.
Oh, then Breaking Dawn is very much not what I was thinking about. What was that in my mind? Oh, never mind. That was Daybreakers. Daybreakers, everybody. Thumbs up. I don't have an opinion about Breaking Dawn.
How can you even? Those are so different. So different. I mean, maybe they have vampires in common.
Totally vampires.
But not even. So
Daybreakers
I have
vampires are like 10 out of 10 vampires.
I'm gonna own this. I have read Breaking Dawn, right? So you
Okay.
can confirm at least one vampire romance novel there.
And I also assume that you've read all the others, but you don't have to confirm or deny that.
Yeah, we're just gonna keep going. Anyway, so what I would say is that the book Venom and Vanilla has a very, very rough start. The first chapter was not well written. You know, I don't actually have a problem with cliches. I think cliches are necessary for a lot of writing, and I also think that writing is harder than most of us think. And so you should give, some leeway on that. But the cliches that were used in the first chapter of Venom and Vanilla, in addition to the just trying to evoke a lot of feeling and emotion for characters that you just didn't know, only using cliches, no description, just really frustrated me. I found myself thinking at one point, oh man, my high school literature teacher would remind this author to show, not tell. And it was very true in the first chapter. However, after the first chapter, it does get a bit better. So I'm gonna throw that out there as well. I say that this is Twilight or Breaking Dawn meets Percy Jackson because I don't know that romance is the central focus of the novel. It definitely plays a part, and there's some discussion of the main character's, the heroine's husband, and kind of her relationship with him. So that's important, right? And definitely sets this apart from the, oh my goodness, I'm swooning over the creepy vampire who happens to be my class and basically resemble a stalker. So that's definitely a distinction. I would actually say what kind of saved this book, in my opinion, is its similarities to parts of Percy Jackson. There's actually some decent world building that goes on. Nothing very in depth, but I don't think you read this book for in depth world building.
Nothing on the level of Road Stop Curio Shop where Medusa sells statues of things that I really enjoyed that.
Yeah,
Percy Jackson.
That was
Pretty
more
good.
clever and creative than this book ever really gets, I would say.
Hmm.
But it's kind of in the same vein, if that makes sense. And I really appreciated that. And there were some plot points. I'm not going to say twists, right? Because saying there's a plot twist, one, gives it away, but two, they're actually just kind of the way the plot just generally structured, right? Some of it you can obviously see coming. But they were very good, right? I did appreciate the plot progression, maybe, in this book to a certain extent. I will say the kind of main antagonist is a little hard to figure out. That kind of causes issues in the latter half of the book. I would say that it's pretty much a B minus overall. If you liked Breaking Dawn and you liked Percy Jackson, you'll probably be okay with this novel, even though it doesn't actually live up to either of those, which might be saying something. Oh, and then one last point, and this is not a spoiler at all. It's just something about the way the author wrote the main character. She's part of a religious denomination that's very similar to a lot of evangelical denominations in the United States.
Is this a real religious denomination, or is this some sort of
No.
fantasy religion?
It's a fantasy denomination.
Interesting.
But she tries to pull a lot of what people would consider kind of limiting stereotypes for women from that, right? So, you know, never put my hair down kind of thing, and or put my hair up. I don't know. Depends on what you're talking about. But part of that is she doesn't swear. And I think the author thought they were being cute by coming up with alternatives for swear words that kind of implied them. And it wasn't cute and it wasn't funny. It was just annoying. Oh, what a donkey butt.
Oh, yeah, okay,
Really?
that would get on my nerves real quick.
Really?
Do you think the fake religiousness was for any sort of point, or was it just out of convenience, or just boring?
I think the author is trying, and again, not too many spoilers. The author's definitely trying to invoke this kind of I'm going to be a strong woman stereotype, right? Like I'm a strong independent woman who don't need
We don't
nothing.
need no man.
Yeah, but really anything in in the novel, right? I thought it was a bit shallow at first, but as I said, I liked the plot progression enough that it kind of faded, right? As I said, the first chapter was just me wanting to kind of throw the book out the window. But that stereotype, even if she kind of indulges it quite a bit, doesn't completely ruin the novel. I mean, the novel has no subtlety. Don't go into this expecting subtlety. If you go in expecting a subtle discussion of like what it means to be kind of a strong woman and feminism and empowered and all that jazz, you're in for major disappointment, and you should go read some like Ursula K. Le Guin because she's much better.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone can really contest that, considering she's won like how many awards? Isn't literally the most for any female fiction writer?
I don't know. Well, the other thing is like, how many awards are there for different genres versus like
Yeah,
science fiction?
true.
Yeah, I mean the big stuff that she has is she's won a lot of Nebulas and Hugos, as well as some other things that I just don't even know what they are. Well, Google pulls up, so I mean obviously I googled this, right, and she's got like in the 20 to 30 awards, but again, very few people have won the Hugo and Nebula awards, and she's got both for best novel. Yeah, sorry, this is not a podcast about Ursula K. Le Guin, though we could have one of those because great author.
Could have many podcasts.
We could probably actually just have like a, I don't know, saga, maybe might be the word, a cycle on Ursula K. Le Guin. Anyway, yeah, so that's my least spoilery thing about Venom and Vanilla. Solid B minus, even in
Solid B minus spoiler.
paranormal
So if I'm
romance.
aware that she's infected with a lethal virus and has to make a deal with a warlock because she's a new breed of soup, and I'm just reading random nouns out of this description at this point, how does that change your description of the
Right,
book?
so we're still going to start with Percy Jackson meets Breaking Dawn, right?
Yeah.
But I'm going to say that the interesting thing that the author does, both in terms of world building and character development for this, is kind of the way she addresses the supernatural is, again, very shallow, not necessarily super in depth, but it's interesting because she pulls in a bunch of different traditions, right? So it's not necessarily Percy Jackson as much as it is American Gods. By Neil Gaiman, but I didn't want to compare the two because that's a very unfair comparison for Neil Gaiman. He should never be placed in the same category as this book.
For the record, I haven't read American Gods.
Oh wow, you're what? And you call yourself a literary? No, you don't. But like,
No, 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 I don't.
like how? It is also a Hugo and Nebula award-winning novel, right? There are only
Oh.
like 10 of these, and you are okay. Fine, I'm not gonna
Sorry.
keep going on this, but
One day.
you disappoint me. You disappoint me immensely. Anyway, so if you know that, I would say it's interesting that she invokes a variety of kind of mythical and historical traditions around this kind of, the supernatural. Also, she has an interesting kind of link to specifically Greek mythology. The issue I was speaking with about the antagonist is, the summary says she was chosen to be killed by a Greek hero trying to make a name for himself. You don't find that out until three-quarters of the way through the book.
Oh, awesome.
It's not like the hero is very shoehorned in. It's almost a Deus ex machina, right? Like just shows up out of nowhere, no foreshadowing, no nothing, right? You don't even realize that there's going to be like a showdown when he first appears because you think that the main character is just so much more effective at like, blowing things up and killing people than this Greek hero that there's just no way they could have a battle, right? Also, I will say it's interesting that the author actually invokes named mythological characters, but not in the sense that they are immortal, but that there's kind of like a uniqueness to them, right? So when the supernatural kind of rises again, it's kind of cyclical throughout human history in the novel. When it rises again, different people can assume the name and abilities of specific individuals in these mythological traditions, even if they are not, the original person who held that. And I thought that was
So
really cool.
someone like becomes Hercules for that
Exactly.
generation or something.
Exactly. As long
Okay.
as because not all famous heroes are immortal, and in fact, many of them aren't. I don't know why the hell the title is Venom and Vanilla. To be perfectly honest, there was never a title drop, so that was good.
Hmm.
Very proud of her for that.
Oh boy, I've got a title drop for you.
Oh no, yeah, and so that would be my kind of like middling spoileriness. There is a vampire romance. I guess we can be very explicit about that. In the first chapter, her husband leaves her, but as I said, it's very poorly done. So like you're supposed to be.
Oh, this whole time I was imagining like high school
Oh
girl.
no, 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 no. She is an independent business owner, in fact. Uh,
Hmm. That feels unique, at least. I don't like. I'm not at all familiar with the genre, but that I haven't heard of that
yeah,
before.
and I liked it because even though it's baking, which is a little bit kind of like, really, are you gonna really have a strong female character that likes baking, and indulge kind of this hilarious stereotype of women needing to have this kind of subservient, effeminate hobby or other side? I mean, it's like why I had issues with Star Trek Voyager, as much of it as I did watch, because even while Captain Janeway is this very strong figure, she goes and pretends to be a character in Jane Austen novels. And I'm like, really? Why can't she just be good at things? And why does she need to have, that hobby or that other side? But regardless, the way that the business is described and the way that Elena, the main character's role in the business described, is very cool. And that was one thing that I did like. Okay, super spoilery version. Are you ready?
Who's the Greek hero?
It's Achilles.
That's my super.
She
Oh,
cuts his tendons in the final battle, so it was pretty cute.
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing to do.
Yeah.
Well, so to clarify, do they know that he's Achilles?
Yeah.
Like when he assumes these powers, is he like? Does the previous spirit? Is it like the Avatar? Like
No.
the generation of Achilles leading up to this guy all show up and they're like, "Hey, don't let anyone near your ankles."
No. It's more like the Greek gods are actually immortal, and so are certain individuals in the pantheon. Merlin is the warlock, actually.
Hmm.
As I said, mixing metaphors, mixing
Yeah.
mythological
Do
traditions.
the vampires come from a particular pantheon, or are they just vampires?
They're just vampires. They're they're Twilight vampires in many ways, right?
Ah,
They do have more classical kind of like enthrallment capabilities, right? So they can like make you their thrall by like mind stuff. Again, not really explained, but that's a pretty traditional view of what vampires have in terms of like special powers, unlike the Twilight series, where it's like, yeah, your special powers bullshit based on who you were as a human.
and sparkling.
And sparkling. Yeah, there's no sparkling, thank God. Well, the vampires don't sparkle.
Are they the like burst into flame and sunlight vampires, or is it
Yes,
just like
yes, they
angry?
are.
Oh, that's a little bold.
Well, yeah, and they also, I mean, they do have werewolves as well, and then they have like Naga was one of the cool different things they brought in from. So they brought in Eastern tradition stuff as well. More limited, but it's there. Anyway, so most people in this world are made into just kind of a generic, I'm a satyr, I'm a werewolf, I'm a vampire, I'm a Naga, I'm an XYZ, right? So there's a class of supernatural being where there are many of them, right? The
Hmm.
main character is made into I'm gonna botch the pronunciation here, but it's like a
Okay,
Drakina, I think, which is a female serpent or dragon.
and it's already got in the description here that no one has ever seen the breed that she is before. Obviously, she's got to be the first one.
No human currently
Oh.
living has, yes, right? And so she's like, special because she's basically a unique or limited, a limited model, so to speak. And later in the novel, she meets other quote monsters or individuals who are assuming the role of like the sirens that sang to Odysseus because there were only a limited number of them, and so they are like more powerful, right? Is kind of the way that the book addresses it. And I thought that was pretty cool because it means you can bring in old monsters like Scylla and Charybdis, and they can kind of exist in the modern world, even though it doesn't make sense to bring in their previous mythological representations. Right? Does that make sense? So my biggest plot issue was with Achilles and just the fact that you can't exactly tell that there's going to be a big battle and you should care about him at all. I would say my other big plot issue is that you don't understand that this is bigger than just some kind of generic fantasy universe until about halfway through the book, and then you find out a lot of stuff about the main character's family, like apparently her grandmother is a priestess of Zeus, whatever that means.
So I noticed that this is book one of three.
Oh
How
yeah.
much of your complaints do you feel is sequel baiting, and how much of it do you think is just like silly world building?
Well, I would actually say almost none of it's sequel baiting, because the sequel baiting comes from the fact that apparently what's going on is Hera is pissed with Zeus for sleeping with the main character's grandmother.
As you do when
Yeah,
you're
and
Zeus.
so that's why all of this is going on, right? And there's like a family curse that again you don't find out about until the end. So like, what? I think most of my plot complaints are actually just poor structuring of the novel, or the novel's just not long enough, right? Again, there's a lot of show not tell issues throughout the whole book. I would say the author just didn't take the time to introduce Achilles properly. I would say, or really much of anything. Yeah, it's written in the first person, right? So again, you're going to deal with the I'm a pretty woman with long legs and
Oh, interesting.
flawless skin.
My book was also written in the first person.
Interesting. I wonder if that's a trend. I don't know. But and then so the thing I liked about the way that the restaurant is linked in, or the bakery is linked in, is one, she is responsible for it in almost entirely, right? So it's not like her husband does the finances and she just comes up with the recipes. So I liked that, and that's definitely played up a little bit. I also liked the fact, she's actually an independent business owner entirely by herself. And
Hmm.
the other thing is, she obviously cares a lot about the business, and she does things that I could definitely see kind of a small business owner doing. So like when she's stressed, she recites recipes for things that she knows she either needs to make or is like working on, right? If you're coming up with your own bakery, like you're coming up with your own cupcake recipes, your own pastry recipes, and you're optimizing for taste and cost and everything else, I would definitely say that that's something you would do. And it also, again, it kind of like very neatly linked in, a habit that she would have, but it felt like a realistic habit. It made her much more of a character, and I really appreciate that.
I don't feel very spoiled on for the amount that was the spoiler version.
I don't even know. Her brother is supposed to be dead at the beginning of the novel. Spoiler, he's not dead. He's the one paying for her to become some stupid Greek monster because Merlin is a contract warlock. Spoilers.
Wait, he's a warlock?
He's
Since when is Merlin a
again,
warlock?
we don't talk about some things in this book, right? Like you just kind of have to you
Okay,
have to let it be. You
fair
can't
enough. Fair
again, like
enough.
you don't read this if you actually care about fantasy. You read this if you are, in your you're a young adult, you're in your 20s and you loved Twilight, and you're not going to care too much as long as something kind of correctly evokes that genre.
Actually, that makes a lot of sense because if you loved Twilight and like that was the time, then now you're in your 20s and you could really identify with a
Yeah.
small business
Oh,
owner.
there's
So
definitely
you got it.
well,
Pat
and
on the
there's a
head there.
wall. So there's walls, these walls that people are segregated behind. Supernaturals must stay behind the wall. Oh yeah, not necessarily spoilery, but kind of. So apparently, she gets really ugly when she's sick, right? And it's one of those like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how terrible I look because I've wasted away due to illness.
She just gets ugly because she's sick, or is this some sort of magical thing about her that exacerbates the fact that you look like terrible when
I
you're
don't
sick?
know, to be honest. I think it's just
Okay.
it's like she's a cancer survivor or has cancer, I guess, not survivor.
Hmm.
And then when Merlin works his witchcraft or warlock wizardry, I don't even know, right? He turns her into the epitome of sexy, which again felt very stereotypical. It was like, oh yeah, I have long legs, and for the first time in my life, I have cleavage, and the only thing to wear in the closet are these really slutty dresses that I would never wear, but damn, I look good in them. And everyone turns to stare at me when I walk in the
Why are
room.
they in the closet?
When Merlin, reworks these people and turns them from humans into supernaturals, you got to dress them post.
Oh, it's not even her closet. Okay.
No, it's not her closet. That's why there are all these super slutty dresses that she would never wear.
Because it's Merlin's closet.
It's Merlin's closet. And he likes
Okay.
to show off his work. Apparently, I don't even know, man. I don't even know. And like it definitely also is like, the big bad head of the vampire coven. How would I say that?
Covenant?
Covenant. Yeah, falls for her because she's just so damn hot. She has the only one who has the ability to resist his charm and mind
Oh
manipulation.
man. Where have I heard that before?
A lot of it you're just kind of like, oh my god, why? And like she gets all hot and flushed at the thought of him, and I'm just kind of like, okay, guys, I guess if that's what people want, that's what people want. But Jesus, oh yeah, her husband is cheating on her and leaves her in the first chapter, as I said, and that informs a lot of her stuff. But she like won't. She's like kisses the vampire and then feels bad because she's a married woman and that's cheating on her husband, who by the way is sleeping with someone else in their bedroom in the house they used to own. So like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks, dear. I don't even know.
Thanks, morals from a religion that doesn't exist.
Well, they're fundamentalists.
What?
You want to talk about clearly trying to evoke some kind of Protestant, evangelical? I don't even know. I mean, basically, what I would ultimately say is, you read Twilight, you liked it, you're okay with young adult fiction still, but you want the setting to be something more like your age. You're in your 20s. Might as well.
This
It's 4.99. It's a weekend read. I mean, it's just not. It's nothing special.
is the YA vampire romance novel version of found it at half price books and decided to load it onto my Kindle. Except that doesn't
Yes,
work.
yes, that is exactly what I would say. This is.
Rather than finding it in half price books, it just shows up in your email one day and you're like, huh, this is literally free. I may as well click this button.
Yeah. So, that's my review. solid B minus paranormal romance.
I think Before You Leap gets less than a B minus. I don't want to be too harsh on it because I don't know how much my just not being impressed is worth knocking it for. The zero, like, haven't even read the description thing. Well, so it's a little weird because the description on Amazon, if you haven't looked at it yet, doesn't actually tell you anything about how the book starts.
Interesting.
The first chapter of the book is this in medias res thing where shit has hit the fan. They're fleeing from the cops. They're on a bridge. Coincidentally, the bridge pictured on the cover. And this dude like has a gun and he's with his friend that he knows is bad news, but he returned to his life for some reason, and they have a hostage and it's not explained why. And he like threatens to throw his friend off the bridge, and all this crazy stuff is happening, and then it just jumps back in time. And at the beginning of chapter 2, the actual story starts.
That can be done well, but it's almost more like a movie tradition, I'd
Right.
say,
And
than a literary.
reading this book, I got a lot of sense that there are things coming from a movie, and there are actually a few things that I think would do better in a movie, but those would be in the spoilerier version. In terms of thoughts, without like discussing any more of what actually happens, one of the things in the book that kind of rubbed me the wrong way is there's just a bunch of casual sexism, and it's not even rape culture sort of sexism. It's like, oh, she's a woman, so of course she understands my emotions better than I do. Or, oh, I did these dumb things because I'm a man, and men are just dumb, and manliness.
Go make a sandwich in the kitchen kind of
Well,
sexism.
no, not even that, because, like I said earlier, it's first person, so it's all this guy's own thoughts.
Okay.
And so he's rationalizing the interactions that he has with all of these different people, and he, like, pegs behaviors to genders in ways that I think feel outdated.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe that's just something I'm extra sensitive to for some weird reason.
because you attended university at a communist liberal hippie.
Yeah, super hippie now, can't even help myself. I can't really say any more without getting into the territory of what's on the Amazon description, which for this book isn't that bad.
How about I ask you a couple questions before I look at the description, right?
All right, what do you got?
One question I would have is, in terms of thrillers, is it kind of does it keep you in suspense, or does it just feel confusing, right? Because there is that fine line between, I desperately want to know and I feel like there's something to know versus like this is just
So, other than the fact that the first chapter, everything's horrible, and it takes you a really long time to piece together how he got himself into that situation,
Mhm.
the like chapter to chapter, it never comes anywhere close to confusing. There's some stuff that you kind of feel, oh, I'm going to find out that, this is what this person was doing, or this is where this guy went. But there's never so much going on that you start to lose track. And as a matter of fact, the book has a hard time keeping anything a mystery for long enough to like be a good payoff.
Okay.
It's definitely on the safe side of thriller.
Okay. And then the other question I would have is like, a stylistic question. I complained a lot about Miss Mayer not really showing a lot, right? She didn't just overly rely on cliches, but she ended up relying on them so much that there was no connections to the characters. So would you have any thoughts on the author's kind of like general style in terms of kind of how he wrote?
I never had a problem with content specifically, aside from the sexism thing. He relies on tropes in a way that is woven to the characters really well, but not necessarily to the plot all that well. And I can speak to this a lot better when I like tell you what happened.
Okay.
But things don't feel jarring or out of place. It's just they feel like they're there and everything else is supporting the trope, which isn't really the way that I would want to see those used. Ideally, the trope would be in service of something the book is trying to do and not the book being in service of the trope, but more on that later.
And then writing style. Did you ever like read something and think to yourself, "Oh my gosh, that was a terrible, terrible sentence"?
No, not really. There is a title drop. It hurt just as much as any title drop ever does. Other than that, though, no particular passages stuck out all that much.
Okay. Sorry, this reminded me of something else in my book that I really needed to.
Are you paging through it? Are you gonna read aloud?
I am gonna read aloud when I find what I'm looking for.
Oh boy.
Oh, come on, where is it? I know it's the end of a chapter. Yeah, here we go. Merlin's smile finally fell. Go die, Elena. That's all you're good for. And there it was. The words I wanted him to admit to. Of course, I thought they were because I was headed to Achilles. That was where I was wrong.
Oh boy.
Maybe it doesn't sound as bad read aloud, but when I read that, I was kind of like, really?
No, so you bring up a good point.
Really?
When you say first person, and I say also first person, we apparently have two different versions of first person, because the main character before you leap isn't aware that he's telling a story.
Okay.
He's narrating his experiences. So there's never any of this, oh, but that was only the beginning, or oh, if I had only known. There are like flashbacks where he's talking about his past, or like a dream that he just woke up from, where it does a little bit of that. But in terms of the plot of the book, you're experiencing it along with him, even though it's in the first person.
Okay. Anyway, I really just hated that. I think it was because, of course, I thought they were because I was headed to Achilles, and it should read, of course, I thought he said that because I was headed to Achilles. Just personal nitpick there. I don't normally have to pause and read something 3 or 4 times to convince myself that I'm not crazy, but I had to there. So, anyway.
So, minor spoiler version before you leave.
Yep.
The description on the Amazon page is actually a lot more about the book as a whole than the first chapter would lead you to believe, which strikes me as weird, but I'm okay with this Amazon description because I think it does a better job of presenting the book than the first chapter does. The protagonist, Greg, he spends the entire book dealing with grief over his dead sister.
Okay.
And his sister dies 10 years prior to the events of the book.
Okay.
And Greg is absolutely certain that she was murdered by an ex-boyfriend, and the ex-boyfriend went to jail because, like, high-profile murder trial where Greg said a bunch of stuff and the jury believed him and sent the guy to jail. And Greg legitimately thought that he did it. And then, inciting incident of the novel, someone shows up and tells Greg that ex-boyfriend guy has been released because new evidence was submitted to the case 10 years after the fact, and it unequivocally proves that he didn't do it.
Okay.
So the actual events of the book, and like I said, it takes a while for you to figure out how all of this leads to him running away from the police with a hostage, but the book itself, the plot for a while is him wondering about this guy and who actually killed his sister if it wasn't this guy, and, you know, what's going to happen with all of that. And he also deals with a lot of his own grief. There's a lot of mental illness in this book, and it's all actually pretty bold-faced. Greg is a therapist, and it says that in the Amazon description thing, that he's a talk therapist, but I think he actually does have a degree in psychology of some kind. There's some bits where he's talking to patients that are varying degrees of crazy, and he himself has weird problems. The Amazon description here is hinting at problems that he's got. He has one problem that's addressed pretty early on, which is he just faints all the time. With any amount of stress put on him, he just passes out and is completely useless.
Is that abused in the plot? Like, are there gag jokes at some points on that? Because that's how I feel that would go. Like, how does the author handle that?
I'll give you that in the spoiler version.
Okay.
We'll get back to that. Let's see what else. And I don't feel like the book's trying to say anything about mental illness. It acknowledges that there are all these people with all these emotional problems and they're relatively normal otherwise, but have all this weird stuff going on in their minds that it's, you know, they talk to with about Greg and they really need to because he makes them better, which is a positive sort of view to have about mental illness, but you don't gain anything perspective-wise from reading this. It's the same sort of stuff you see in TV or movies where it's like, oh, you know, crazy people. They think crazy things. It's that sort of mental illness.
So maybe another way to phrase it would be like, it handles mental illness decently, but it's not in-depth enough or related to the plot enough to actually be a solid contributing factor to the book.
It's pretty related to the plot.
Okay.
The thing is, the way the plot goes, and this ties back into my short thumbs down on this, is the book doesn't say very much about anything.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people's mental state and whether or not they're actually, like, their brains doing the right job all the time is definitely handled throughout the whole book. But just because it's handled throughout the whole book doesn't mean that there's anything gained in that.
Okay.
Like, it's not mishandled and it's not forgotten. It's just, it doesn't go anywhere.
Okay. That makes sense.
Major spoiler version.
Okay.
Because, you know, Major spoilers are fun, and I have some whining to do about the
Some
major spoilers in this
whinging,
book.
as
Yeah,
Brady would say.
one of those. Want some whinging. So the ex-boyfriend that gets out of jail, immediately drives from Michigan to Florida. Greg used to live in Michigan and then fled to Florida to try to get away from the grief of his sister.
Yeah.
His sister also meant way too much to him. Like, I'm sorry. Maybe it's just because I'm not a twin with any of my sisters,
I
but
was about to say, I need to send them this clip.
his entire existence is just destroyed when his sister is gone. And the way he thinks about his memories of her is some weird immortalized saint of perfectness, and oh, she got everything that was good from the genes and he got all the bad genes as they were born from the same
What?
genetic makeup.
Did you ever watch or read Bridge to Terabithia?
I did watch it.
Would it be
I didn't read the book.
almost how that treats? Or I never saw the movie, but I'm assuming that the treatment of the main female character is somewhat similar, where she's just in many ways almost perfect.
Well, kind of, and part of it is you never actually are told, you never see the sister in the book.
Yeah.
It's all his descriptions of how his sister was before she died. So it's take it with a grain of salt the fact that she was way too perfect.
Yeah.
But also their relationship just kind of weirds me out a little bit.
Okay.
And so she dies. He goes to Florida. He brings along this friend of his named Eve, and they buy a house together. They have this totally platonic relationship. He is the other man in an affair with this woman who gets killed. This is later plot stuff. So the ex-boyfriend comes down, and also this guy named Kyle, who Greg kind of ran into when they were kids, who he knew was bad news the whole time, and who shows up and is the guy in the car chase at the end, also comes down. And so
we've got Greg, Kyle, the ex-boyfriend, and Eve in
right,
Florida.
and also the married woman that Greg is with and her husband.
Okay.
And then a bunch of supporting characters. There's like cops and lawyers and therapy patients and the rest of those. But so Zoe is the girl that Greg was having a thing with.
Yeah.
Her husband kills her, and Greg almost gets framed for it, but not really. But also the ex-boyfriend guy attacked Greg, and then he fainted and doesn't know where the ex-boyfriend guy went. And then a dead body showed up somewhere, and he thinks it was him, and he doesn't know if he killed him or not.
Because when you faint, you can murder people, or like doesn't know whether or not the ex-boyfriend murdered.
Right. So this is getting into the Greg's personal mental illness stuff, and part of why the fainting became a big deal, other than it just being kind of inconvenient that he literally can't get stressed or else he stops working.
Yeah.
The actual point of the book, where the first chapter is 85% through the book.
Okay.
It's not in medias res. You start the book at the climax, and then you read all of the information that it takes to get to the climax, and then the rest of the book is just reading how everyone turned out okay in the end, or at least the people that survived turned out okay in the end. The hostage is the husband that killed the woman that Greg was having an affair with, and then he and Kyle, who showed up to try to protect him from the ex-boyfriend guy, go after the husband.
Wait, why is Kyle protecting him from the ex-boyfriend?
So Kyle's protecting him from the ex-boyfriend guy because he also was thrown in jail at the same time as the ex-boyfriend guy, and he learned while they were cellmates that the ex-boyfriend guy really wanted revenge as soon as he got out, and they both got out at the same time for reasons that aren't explained. And biggest possible spoiler, Kyle is the one that killed the sister, not actually the ex-boyfriend guy.
Wow, what a shock.
Well, it gets even worse than that. Well, before you learn that Kyle killed the sister, which is what happens in the last chapter, basically. They're on the bridge. The way they get out of the bridge is Kyle essentially talks to the police on the phone, says that everything was his idea, and then throws the husband off the bridge and jumps off the bridge himself. That was where the title drop showed up, the Before You Leap, because main character guy also considered jumping off the bridge because he was like, oh, I'm going to die, because he didn't know what Kyle said.
Oh my gosh, no.
And then it turns out that the police come up to him and like, are you okay, sir? We understand this has all been really difficult for you. And he's like, oh, what's happening?
It's just, I feel like that ending is almost a cop-out.
Oh, no, it gets way worse.
Oh, no.
So,
Please don't tell me.
So he wakes up in the hospital, and he is psychoanalyzing himself, because of course he's a therapist.
Yeah.
And he decides that Kyle is a figment of his imagination.
No, what?
Like, we're talking straight up Tyler Durden. So he explains away his entire life of fainting when he is stressed, as Kyle is his alter ego that comes out when he blacks out, and does bad things. Because the first time he met Kyle was when he was getting picked on in school, and he was being bullied and fainted, and then the bullies all ran away because Kyle ran in and like punched them or something. And he has a bunch of memories like this, but didn't actually know Kyle that well. And then all of the time that Kyle was with him in Florida is also explained by, the husband attacked him and he fainted, and then he woke up and the husband was beaten to shit and Kyle was just sitting there on the bed like cracking jokes at him. So he gives his story to the police as if Kyle wasn't even there. He's like, no, I did everything myself. There wasn't even another person in the car. Like, I was just driving. I took this guy on myself. The police are like, you're certifiably insane. This doesn't make any sense. What are you talking about? And then the cop that came from Michigan down to Florida to let him know that the ex-boyfriend guy was out in the first place tells him that they got DNA results off of his sister's corpse, which they found because they were tipped off to its location by Kyle, because Kyle killed her. And they found DNA under her fingernails that was Kyle's. And so they show him the picture and they're like, do you know who this is? And he's like, oh my God, they actually have a picture of Kyle. That means he's real.
Are you?
Holy shit.
Okay.
So you get Tyler Durden and then you get un-Tyler Durden, and it turns out Kyle did everything the whole time. And ex-boyfriend guy really did just want to talk, and Greg just made everything worse and caused the fight between them. And then Kyle showed up and almost killed ex-boyfriend guy, but then the body that the police found wasn't ex-boyfriend guy. It was just some hobo that got too drunk and fell into a river, which is really dumb because you were in suspense for like half the book over whether or not that body was the ex-boyfriend when it was literally not even a character.
Okay. Yeah, I can see why this would frustrate you.
But then
What?
In the epilogue,
Surely it's over.
there is an epilogue to this book, which isn't even that long to begin with. Greg is going to grief counseling, not only because his sister died and he never properly dealt with that, but also because the woman he was sleeping with got killed by her husband and he saw her die. He held her as the last blood drained out of her body, and it was really tragic. And actually pretty well written for that part. But he is also going to therapy with Eve, who is the platonic roommate that he brought from Michigan, who is an agoraphobe blogger.
And then they shack up.
No. And then she's the figment of his imagination.
Wait. She's like a legit figment of his imagination?
Yeah. So it turns out that this minor character who doesn't leave his house until he's in the hospital in the last chapter because she's just afraid of going outside is the literal image of his dead sister that he has conjured up and pretends that he lives with as a way of dealing with his grief.
What?
And then he goes to therapy to talk about dealing with his grief over the two women in his life that died. And she goes to the therapist with him because she also wants to learn how to go out of the house and be a real member of society. And the very last part of the book, the therapist guy is talking straight to Greg while Eve is in the room, and he doesn't acknowledge her at all. And it's really clear before they even officially say that she's not real, that she's just straight up not real.
Yeah.
And then he takes a picture on a Polaroid of the two of them and shows Greg the picture, and it's literally just Greg.
Oh my God.
And there's no woman next to him. And he turns to Eve, who is still next to him because he's still insane, and says, why aren't you in the picture? And Eve's like, this therapist's kind of crazy. We should probably get a second opinion on whether or not I'm real. And that's where the book ends.
I don't know how to feel about this.
So you get Tyler Durden, and then you get un-Tyler Durden,
And then you get
and you get re-Tyler Durden for no reason. You don't gain anything. You already knew that he was struggling with grief and he was killing himself over this and he wasn't doing anything useful. And Eve was actually a pretty decent character. She's a little quirky, sure, addressed in kind of a sexist way because, this guy's a therapist, so he should understand emotions, but apparently she's way better than him. But I guess you could interpret that as him projecting this weird sister pantheon thing that he's always had, but he didn't know that Eve was supposed to be his sister. It's all sorts of weird. Doesn't mean anything. Thumbs down.
Yeah, I feel like that's a missed opportunity there.
What is the opportunity that was missed? The opportunity to say something or to not double reverse Tyler Durden the whole story?
Yes, no, definitely the second one. If the author hadn't done Kyle's a figment of his imagination, and then had done the thing with Eve, it could have been an interesting question about the reliability of your narrator and how real the story actually was.
So you do get that vibe, but not in an unreliable narrator sort of way, which is a valuable literary device. But from the very first chapter, which I don't think should be the first chapter, I think you should have left the climax at the part of the book where the climax goes. In the very first chapter, you read this and you're like, okay, main character guy is clearly screwed. The only way he's possibly getting out of this is if old friend guy either takes the fall or is a figment of his imagination. And then you read the rest of the book, and it's not even hinted that heavily, but because it's so obvious, when Greg finally wakes up and starts to think about this, you're like, oh, of course he was a figment of his imagination all along. Like, you could have just mentioned that. And then he wasn't, and then she was, and nothing matters.
I think that's the ultimate conclusion there is nothing matters. So I was looking at the books on Amazon, and it turns out yours is like 400 something pages, and mine was 200 something pages.
Oh, that explains why it took me twice as long to read mine as it took you to read yours.
Yeah, I definitely also think that might have factored into like at least my rating versus your rating as well. Because if mine had been 400 pages of that, I don't know if I could even give it a B minus.
It didn't feel too long. Most of the time when a chapter ended, I felt like I wanted to read the next chapter. It's just every time there was a reveal, I was like, oh, you could have just said that.
Yeah.
Like the woman he's having an affair with who gets killed is a cop. And when she's introduced, Greg is having a flashback to the scene at a bar where they meet. And this is actually a bit of writing that did stand out to me. She has some dialogue where she talks about how her occupation is obvious from her appearance. And it doesn't straight up say what her occupation is, but 2 or 3 chapters later, Greg gets pulled over and the cop is giving him a hard time and then just makes out with him, like out of the blue. And you're like, okay, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And then you're like, oh, never mind. It's the woman, isn't it? And then it's the woman. The book is full of those sorts of reveals where it's like you could have just said that.
Yeah.
If you had told me in the beginning, I wouldn't have had to think about it at all. But also, I didn't gain anything about the fact that I did think about it. And that's why I gave it like a middling thriller category, because it's a little mysterious, but never thrilling.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think either of us will be reading the other person's purchase or free download then.
Or free download. And it's actually kind of a bummer if the point of this show is as a recommendation. Our recommendation this week is to get another book. This month is to get another book.
Yeah, no, I would say that unless you really like Twilight and paranormal romance, and you cleaned out the young adult section and you're moving on up.
But if you change your mind, Amazon affiliate links and the Doobly Doo Pants Bar.
If they download a free book through an Amazon affiliate link, do we get
a totally insignificant amount of money?
Okay.
I don't think you get anything. I don't know.
It'd be nice if we got like a full price for that, but I doubt we do.
10%.
Well, yeah, but 10% of 0 is 0, whereas 10% of $4.99 is 50
Yeah,
cents.
10% of 0 is 0, and 10% of $5 is 50 cents, which is,
Hey,
some money, but it's pretty insignificant.
thousands of people are going to listen to this. And
Literally thousands of us.
every subscriber to everything